The Vampire King had conquered armies, ended bloodlines with a glance, and ruled the Eternal Court for over 3 centuries. But the woman standing before him just asked if he needed more coffee, like he was any other customer in her late-night diner. Sovereign Drakel Morvinox, called the Pale Sovereign by those who whispered his name in fear, stood motionless in the fluorescent-lit establishment, his ancient crimson eyes fixed on the young woman who had just turned away from him without a trace of recognition or terror. His white hair fell past his shoulders in a manner that spoke of aristocratic neglect rather than careful grooming, and his skin held the alabaster pallor that marked him as one of the undying. He wore black despite the modern era's preference for color, his long coat and tailored clothing a nod to centuries past. Everything about him screamed danger, power, and otherness, and she had just offered him a refill. His entourage, 3 elder vampires who had accompanied him on this unusual excursion into the human world, stood frozen near the entrance of the diner, their expressions shifting between horror and fascination. Never in their immortal lives had they witnessed someone treat their king with such casual indifference. "Sir?" The woman turned back, her eyebrows raised slightly. She had dark auburn hair pulled into a messy ponytail, warm hazel eyes that held no fear, and an apron stained with what appeared to be ketchup and coffee. Her name tag read Nora in slightly faded letters. "Did you want to sit down, or are you just going to stand there all night? Fair warning, the breakfast crowd comes in around 5, and they get cranky if someone's blocking the door." Sovereign's mouth opened slightly, then closed. In 347 years of existence, he had never been rendered speechless. Kings bowed before him. Ancient vampires averted their eyes in his presence. Entire covens fell silent when he entered a room. This mortal woman, this Nora with her coffee-stained apron and tired smile, had just told him to move because he was blocking foot traffic. He began, his voice carrying the faint accent of old European nobility, smoother than silk and twice as dangerous. "I will sit." "Great choice," Nora said brightly, grabbing a laminated menu from behind the counter. "Booth or table?" "Booth." The word came out more curtly than he intended, but she didn't seem bothered. "This way, then." She led him to a worn red vinyl booth near the window, the kind that had probably been there since the 1970s. The diner itself was a study in American nostalgia, checkered floors, chrome accents, and a jukebox in the corner that was currently playing something with too many guitars. It was called Lucky's, according to the neon sign outside, and it was nestled in a part of the city that existed in the strange liminal space between the human world and the supernatural one. Sovereign had come here specifically because of whispers that a place existed where the veil between worlds grew thin, where vampires could walk more freely without the usual precautions. He had expected danger, perhaps a trap set by one of his many enemies. He had not expected a diner, and he certainly had not expected Nora Lindell, whose entire demeanor suggested she had far more important things to worry about than an ancient vampire sitting in her section. He slid into the booth with a grace that was almost inhuman, his movements too fluid, too perfect. Nora set the menu down in front of him without comment. "Coffee, tea, or something stronger?" "Though full disclosure, our something stronger is just coffee with Baileys, and I'm not supposed to serve it without seeing ID first." She pulled a pen from behind her ear, poised over her order pad. "Coffee," Sovereign said slowly, still trying to reconcile this experience with literally every other interaction he'd had with humans in the past century. "Black." "Traditional. I respect that." She scribbled on her pad. "Food? The meatloaf is actually pretty good today, which is saying something because usually Jerry overcooks it to the point where it could be used as a weapon." Behind him, he heard one of his vampires, Lucian, most likely make a choking sound. The idea of their king eating mortal food, of sitting in a diner and engaging in small talk about meatloaf, was apparently too much. "Just coffee," Sovereign said, his eyes not leaving Nora's face. There was something fascinating about her, something beyond her unusual reaction to his presence. She carried herself with the exhaustion of someone who worked too many hours, but beneath that was a core of steel, a quiet strength that intrigued him. "For now." "Your call. I'll be back in a minute." She tucked the pad into her apron pocket and walked away, her sneakers squeaking slightly on the checkered floor. The moment she disappeared through the swinging door to the kitchen, Lucian appeared at Sovereign's side, his own white hair perfectly arranged, his pale features tight with concern. "My king, this is highly irregular. We should not be here." "The woman." Is mortal, Sovereign interrupted, his voice dropping to a tone that made even centuries-old vampires hesitate, and unaware of what I am. Impossible, whispered Seraphine, another of his companions, her ageless beauty marked by the same white hair and porcelain skin that characterized their kind. Everyone knows your face, your presence, the power that radiates from you. She does not feel it. Sovereign leaned back in the booth, a strange expression crossing his features. She looks at me and sees only a man. A blind mortal, perhaps? Lucian muttered, but he retreated when Sovereign's gaze flickered toward him. Nora returned moments later with a steaming mug of coffee, setting it down on the table with practiced ease. There you go. Let me know if you need anything else. She started to turn away, then paused. Hey, are those your friends by the door? Because they've been standing there like statues for 5 minutes, and it's starting to creep out the cook. Sovereign glanced toward his entourage, then back at Nora. A decision crystallized in his mind, one that would have far-reaching consequences he couldn't yet foresee. They were just leaving. 3 vampires stared at him in various states of shock. They were just leaving, he repeated, his tone making it clear this was not a request. Lucian bowed stiffly. As you command, my king. The words came out strangled, disbelieving, but he gestured to the others, and they filed out of the diner into the night, leaving Sovereign alone with the mortal woman who had somehow managed to treat him like any other customer. King? Nora's voice held amusement. Let me guess you guys are in a band. Or is it one of those Renaissance fair things? Because I dated a guy once who was super into medieval roleplay, and let me tell you, it got weird fast. Sovereign picked up his coffee cup, marveling at the mundanity of the action. When was the last time he had held something so ordinary? Something like that. Thought so. She leaned against the booth across from him, apparently not in any hurry now that the diner was empty except for them and whoever Jerry was in the kitchen. You've got that whole dramatic aesthetic going on. The long hair, the coat, the I brood in castles vibe. I brood in castles, he repeated, and despite himself, despite 3 centuries of cultivated control and regal bearing, he felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Nailed it. Nora grinned at him, and something in Sovereign's chest, something he had assumed dead along with his heartbeat, tightened. So what brings you to Lucky's at 2 a.m, besides our world-famous mediocre coffee? He should leave. Every instinct honed over centuries told him that this was dangerous in ways he didn't yet understand. But instead, he found himself saying, curiosity. About diners or about this neighborhood? Her tone was light, but he caught something underneath it, a wariness that suggested she knew more about this area's unusual nature than her casual demeanor indicated. Both? He sipped the coffee, which was as mediocre as advertised, but somehow comforting in its very ordinariness. You work here often? Every night, 11 to 7. Glamorous, I know. She rolled her eyes, but there was no real bitterness in it. Trying to save up for college. I'm a little behind on the whole life plan thing. How old are you? The question came out more sharply than intended, that ancient instinct to assess and categorize taking over. 23. Why, do I look older? Because I know these dark circles under my eyes are legendary, but I prefer to think of them as character building. She touched her face self-consciously, and Sovereign felt an unfamiliar urge to reassure her. You look... He paused, searching for words in a way he never had to before. Sovereign Dracul Morvinox, who had negotiated with ancient covens and stared down rival kings, was struggling to compliment a diner waitress. Tired, but not old. Wow, such flattery. You really know how to charm a girl. But she was smiling, apparently finding his awkwardness endearing rather than off-putting. The bell above the door chimed, and 2 humans stumbled in, college students, drunk and loud, already arguing about whether to order pancakes or waffles. Nora straightened, her break apparently over. Duty calls, she said, glancing at the new arrivals. Enjoy your coffee, brooding castle guy. Sovereign, he said before he could stop himself. My name is Sovereign. She turned back, her expression slightly surprised. Sovereign? As in, like, ruler? It is a family name. Not entirely a lie. His mother had named him that as a dark joke, knowing what he would become. Well, it suits you. Very dramatic. She smiled again, and then she was gone, moving to greet the drunk students with the same easy competence she had shown him. Sovereign sat in the booth for another hour, nursing his mediocre coffee and watching Nora work. He observed the way she handled the rowdy students with humor and firm boundaries, the way she joked with the cook, a grizzled man who appeared briefly to yell about Table 6's eggs and the way she occasionally glanced in his direction with an expression he couldn't quite read. When he finally rose to leave, placing far too much money on the table for a single cup of coffee, she caught him at the door. "Hey, Sovereign." She had his change in her hand, but he waved it away. "This is like $100. "For the entertainment," he said smoothly. "Your observations about meatloaf weaponry were particularly enlightening." She stared at him, then at the money, then back at him. "You're either the best tipper in the world or completely insane." "Perhaps both." He pushed open the door, the bell chiming above him, before stepping out into the night where his entourage would be waiting with 1,000 questions and concerns. He paused. "I may return, if that would be acceptable." Nora tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, her expression softening in a way that made her look younger and somehow more beautiful. "Yeah," she said quietly. "Yeah, that would be acceptable." He nodded once, regal despite the mundane setting, and disappeared into the darkness. The moment he was gone, Nora leaned against the door, her heart pounding in a way she didn't want to examine too closely. The man, Sovereign? What kind of name was that? Had been strange. Beautiful in an otherworldly way, yes, but also strange. There had been something about his eyes, about the way he moved, that set off alarm bells in the part of her mind that had learned to recognize danger through years of working late-night shifts in a questionable neighborhood. But he had also been kind, in his own odd way, and lonely. She had seen that clearly, that bone-deep loneliness that transcended words. "You okay, Nora?" Jerry called from the kitchen. "Yeah," she called back, shaking off the strange mood. "Yeah, I'm fine." But as she returned to work, wiping down tables and refilling coffee for the few stragglers who wandered in before dawn, she found her thoughts returning again and again to the pale man with crimson eyes who had looked at her like she was a puzzle he desperately wanted to solve. 3 nights later, Sovereign returned. Nora was in the middle of balancing plates on her arm, a skill she had perfected through sheer necessity when the bell chimed, and he walked in. He looked exactly the same, which should have been unremarkable, but somehow wasn't. The long white hair, the black clothing that seemed to absorb light, the bearing that suggested he was slumming it just by existing in a normal establishment. "Coffee guy," she greeted him, setting down the plates at table 4 before heading his way. "Back for more mediocre beverages?" "Your coffee has haunted me," Sovereign said with perfect seriousness, though she caught something in his eyes that might have been humor. "That's the most depressing thing I've ever heard, and I once served a guy who told me his wife left him for their marriage counselor." She grabbed a menu. "Same booth?" "Please," as she led him to the window booth which she had unconsciously started thinking of as his booth. She was aware of his presence behind her in a way that was both thrilling and unsettling. He moved silently, gracefully, and when she turned around after he had slid into his seat, she found him already studying her with that intense crimson gaze. "Do I have something on my face?" she asked, touching her cheek self-consciously. "No." He seemed to consider his next words carefully. "I am simply unused to being in the presence of someone who treats me without pretense." "As opposed to all those people who treat you with pretense?" She pulled out her order pad. "What kind of circles do you run in?" "Complicated ones." His expression flickered with something dark. "There are expectations of who I should be, how I should act. It becomes tiresome." Nora sat down across from him without asking permission, a violation of diner protocol that she somehow knew he wouldn't mind. "I get that. When I was in high school, everyone expected me to be a certain way because of my family. My dad was this big deal, very respected, very traditional. Had all these plans for me." She shrugged. "Then he died. Those plans went out the window, and I ended up here. But you know what? I think I like this version of my life better. It's mine." Sovereign leaned forward slightly, his attention utterly focused on her in a way that made her feel like the only person in the world. "What happened to your father?" "Car accident, 3 years ago." She said it matter-of-factly, having made peace with the grief, even if it never entirely went away. "He was a good man, just had very fixed ideas about how life should go." "What happened to your family, since we're apparently having therapy hour in a diner?" "They are alive," he said slowly, but distant. "I have responsibilities that keep me apart from most meaningful connections." "That sounds lonely." "It is." The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised her. Sovereign was accustomed to guarding his words, measuring every syllable for political advantage or strategic necessity. But with this mortal woman who looked at him with warmth instead of fear, the truth slipped out like water through his fingers. "Well," Nora said, standing up and pulling her order pad back out, "maybe you should make some less complicated friends. People you can just grab coffee with at 2 in the morning without it being a whole thing." "Are you volunteering for this position?" He raised one elegant eyebrow. "I mean, I'm already serving you coffee, so we might as well make it official." She grinned at him. "Fair warning, though, I'm a terrible friend. I forget birthdays, I'm always tired, and I have strong opinions about which fast food chain has the best fries. I will endeavor to survive these hardships." Was he flirting? Sovereign Drakel Morvinox, pale sovereign of the Eternal Court, master of 17 covens and terror of his enemies, was flirting with a diner waitress who thought his name was a Renaissance fair affectation. Black coffee still? Yes, and perhaps, he glanced at the menu, the meatloaf you mentioned before, if it is not currently being used as a weapon. Nora's face lit up with delight. "Jerry got his act together this week, coming right up." As she walked away, Sovereign felt the weight of centuries settle differently on his shoulders. He had come back to the diner telling himself it was simple curiosity, a momentary diversion from the endless politics and bloodshed of vampire society. But watching Nora laugh with another customer, seeing the way she moved through the world with such uncomplicated humanity, he was forced to acknowledge a different truth. He was lonely. And she made him feel less so. Over the following weeks, Sovereign became a regular fixture at Lucky's Diner. He arrived like clockwork at 2 in the morning and stayed until just before dawn, always sitting in the same booth, always ordering black coffee and whatever food Nora recommended that night. Their conversations meandered through territory both profound and ridiculous. She told him about her dream of studying art history, about her younger brother who lived across the country, about her terrible ex-boyfriend who had stolen her car and her dignity in that order. He told her carefully edited versions of his life, stories about family business that required extensive travel, about the weight of expectations and the isolation of leadership positions. He never told her what he was. That omission grew heavier with each passing night, but the alternative, watching fear replace the warmth in her eyes, was unthinkable. "You know what I don't get about you?" Nora asked one night, sliding into the booth across from him during a rare slow period. It was nearly 4 in the morning, that dead zone between the drunks stumbling out of bars and the early risers heading to work. "I expect there is much about me you do not understand," Sovereign replied, sipping his coffee. He had actually grown to enjoy it, or perhaps he simply enjoyed the ritual of sharing it with her. "You're loaded, right? I mean, you tip like someone who uses $100 bills as tissues. But you come here night after night to this dive to drink bad coffee and eat Jerry's questionable meatloaf. Why?" "Because you are here," he thought, but did not say. "Because for a few hours each night, I can pretend to be the man you see when you look at me instead of the monster I am." "The company," he said instead, his crimson eyes holding hers. "It is exceptional." Nora felt heat creep up her neck, a blush she desperately tried to suppress. In the weeks since Sovereign had first walked into the diner, something had shifted between them. What started as casual conversation had deepened into genuine connection. She found herself looking forward to his arrival, found herself saving up stories and observations to share with him, found herself lying awake during the day thinking about the way his rare smiles transformed his austere features into something breathtaking. She was, she realized with dawning horror and excitement, developing feelings for the strange, wealthy, probably in the mob man who haunted her workplace. "You're a charmer," she said, trying for lightness. "Probably have people falling all over you wherever you go." "No," his response was immediate and intense. "There is only one person whose attention I value, one person who sees me rather than what I represent." The air between them grew charged with unspoken things. Nora swallowed hard, her heart doing complicated gymnastics in her chest. "Sovereign." The bell above the door chimed, and they both looked up to see a woman entering the diner. But this was not a normal customer. She had the same white hair, the same pale skin, the same otherworldly grace that characterized Sovereign. She wore a long dark dress that seemed out of place in the modern setting, and her eyes, black as midnight, fixed on Sovereign with an expression of profound disapproval. "My king," she said, her voice carrying an accent that spoke of centuries past. "You have been absent from court for far too long. There are matters that require your attention." Nora looked between them, confusion, and something else hurt, perhaps, at the sudden intrusion of Sovereign's other life crossing her features. "King?" she repeated. "She called you my king. What is this, some kind of weird kink thing?" "Seraphine," Sovereign said coldly, not taking his eyes off Nora. "Leave, now." "I will not leave you here with this mortal. She is a distraction from your duties, from—" "I said leave." Power rolled off Sovereign in waves, invisible but undeniable. The lights in the diner flickered. The air grew colder. For the first time since entering Lucky's, he allowed a fraction of his true nature to show. Seraphine's eyes widened, and she bowed low. "As you command." She straightened, shot one last unreadable look at Nora, and swept out of the diner with inhuman speed. The silence she left behind was deafening. "What?" Nora said slowly, standing up from the booth. "Was that?" Sovereign rose as well, his movements controlled but tense. "A complication." "A complication." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "She called you king. She talked about court. And did the lights just flicker because you got angry? What the hell's going on?" This was the moment. He could lie, could construct an elaborate explanation that would preserve the comfortable fiction they had built together. Or he could tell her the truth and watch everything crumble. "Nora," he began, and something in his tone made her take a step back. "There are things about me that you do not know, things that would frighten you. Try me." She crossed her arms, her expression shifting from confusion to determination. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 2 years. I've seen things that don't make sense, people who aren't quite right. I'm not as naive as you think." "I'm not a person," he said quietly. "Not anymore. Not for a very long time." She waited, her hazel eyes searching his face. "I am vampire," Sovereign continued, the words feeling strange after weeks of omission. "The Vampire King, specifically. I rule the Eternal Court, command 17 covens, and have existed for over 300 years. I am what humans fear in the dark, what mothers warn their children about. I am immortal, predatory, and dangerous." Nora stared at him. Then she started to laugh. "Oh my God!" she gasped between giggles. "Oh my God, you're serious! You actually expect me to believe—" She stopped suddenly, her laughter dying as she really looked at him, at the way the fluorescent light seemed to barely touch him, casting strange shadows. At his skin, which wasn't just pale but luminescent. At his eyes, which now that she was paying attention, were definitely not a normal human red, but something else, something that seemed to glow from within. At his teeth, which had subtly elongated, showing pointed canines. "You're serious," she whispered. "Yes." He remained perfectly still, letting her process, resisting every instinct that screamed at him to reach for her, to comfort her. "I have been coming here because you treated me like a man instead of a monster. Because for a few hours each night, I could pretend to be human again. I should have told you sooner. I should have stayed away entirely. But I find myself incapable of either wisdom when it comes to you." Nora backed up until she hit the counter, her mind racing. Vampires. He was claiming to be a vampire, which should be insane, should be the ranting of a madman, except it made sense. The way he moved. The way he never came in before nightfall and always left before dawn. The strange people who sometimes watched the diner from across the street, people with the same pale features. The way he sometimes spoke with that old-fashioned cadence, like English was a language he had learned centuries ago. "Prove it," she said suddenly. Sovereign tilted his head, an inhuman gesture. "I could show you speed, strength. I could demonstrate abilities that would leave no doubt, but I think you already believe me." He was right. Somehow, impossibly, she did believe him. And more terrifying than the revelation itself was her next thought. It didn't change how she felt about him. "Okay," she said slowly. "Okay, you're a vampire. The Vampire King. You've been alive for 300 years. And you've been coming to my diner to eat food you probably don't even need and drink coffee that can't possibly affect you because... Why exactly?" "Because I am drawn to you in a way I have not experienced in centuries," Sovereign admitted, abandoning pretense entirely. "Because your warmth calls to something I thought I had lost. Because when you smile at me, I remember what it felt like to be human." That's... Nora pressed her hands to her face, her emotions a chaotic tangle. That's really intense. You know that's really intense, right? I am aware. A pause. I understand if you wish me to leave and never return. I understand if this revelation has destroyed whatever friendship we had built. She lowered her hands, looking at him, really looking at him, and seeing both the man who had listened to her dreams and the ancient creature who could probably kill her without effort. Are you dangerous? Yes. He would not lie to her, not about this. To me? No. The word came out fierce, almost angry. Never to you. I would tear apart anyone who even thought of harming you. That should have been terrifying. Instead, Nora felt a thrill run through her, some primal part of her responding to the protectiveness in his declaration. This is insane. I'm insane. I should be running away screaming. Yes, you should. Sovereign took a single step toward her, his expression raw with hope and fear and longing. Why are you not? Because, Nora said, and she could hear the tremor in her own voice. Because I think I've been falling for you, and apparently my heart doesn't care about things like mortality and species differences. The words hung between them, monumental and terrifying and true. Sovereign closed the remaining distance between them in a movement too fast for human eyes to track, stopping mere inches from her. Up close, she could see the inhuman perfection of his features, the slight luminescence of his skin, the way his chest didn't rise and fall with breath because he no longer needed to breathe. Nora Lindell, he said softly, raising one hand to cup her face with a gentleness that contradicted his predatory nature. If you allow me into your heart, I will protect it with everything I am. I will defend you against any threat, human or vampire. I will give you all the pieces of myself I have left to give. But you must understand my world is dangerous. Being with me would put you at risk. She leaned into his touch, his skin cool against hers. I work alone at a diner in the sketchy part of town from midnight to dawn. I'm pretty familiar with risk. This is different. I know. She reached up to cover his hand with hers. And I'm still saying I want to try. If you want to try. For answer, Sovereign leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle despite his inhuman strength, reverent despite his predatory nature, and it tasted like 300 years of loneliness, finally finding an end. Nora made a small sound and kissed him back, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck, pulling him closer, despite the supernatural chill of his skin. When they finally broke apart, both were trembling. This complicates matters significantly, Sovereign murmured against her hair, holding her close. Yeah, well, I always did like a challenge. Nora pulled back slightly to look at him. So what now? Do I get to meet the vampire court? Are there protocols? Do I need to learn to curtsy? He laughed, the sound startled and genuine. Perhaps we could start with something smaller. Dinner? Somewhere other than this diner? Sovereign, you're a vampire. Do you even eat dinner? No, but I enjoy watching you eat, and I'm told I can be passably charming company even in normal restaurants. Passably charming, Nora echoed, shaking her head in disbelief at her own life. I'm dating a vampire king who describes himself as passably charming. This is fine. Everything is fine. Is it? He searched her face anxiously, centuries of confidence abandoned in the face of this one mortal woman's opinion. Yeah, she said softly, touching his face with wonder. Yeah, I think it is. They were wrong, of course. Everything was not fine. Because while Sovereign had been courting Nora in the human world, his extended absence from court had created a power vacuum that his enemies were eager to exploit. And because Seraphine, despite her loyalty to her king, had let slip to the wrong vampire that Sovereign Drakel Morvinox had developed feelings for a human. The news spread through the supernatural community like wildfire, and with it came both opportunity and danger. 3 nights after their first kiss, Nora was closing up the diner alone Jerry had left early with a headache when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up with a smile, expecting Sovereign, but instead found 3 strangers entering the establishment. They had the telltale white hair and pale skin that she now recognized as markers of vampires. But unlike Sovereign's regal bearing or Seraphine's austere elegance, these 3 radiated menace. 2 men and 1 woman, all dressed in dark clothing that seemed to drink the light, all watching her with expressions of cruel amusement. You must be the human, the woman said, her accent placing her somewhere in Eastern Europe centuries ago. The one who has captured our king's attention. Nora's hand moved slowly toward the phone in her pocket. I don't know what you're talking about. Please. One of the men moved with inhuman speed, suddenly standing between her and the exit. Do not insult us with lies. We can smell him on you. His claim, his desire, it is written all over your fragile mortal body. What do you want? Nora forced her voice to remain steady, channeling every ounce of courage she possessed. To deliver a message, the woman smiled, showing elongated fangs. The eternal court grows restless with Sovereign's distraction. There are those who believe his attachment to you makes him weak, vulnerable. There are those who would use you to hurt him. Are you those people? Us? No, the woman laughed. We are loyal to our king, even if we question his judgment. We are here to warn you others are coming. Vampires who see Sovereign's feelings for you as an opportunity to challenge his rule. They will try to take you, hurt you, use you as leverage. Then You need to leave, the second man interrupted. End this foolish romance before it gets you killed and plunges our world into war. Sovereign Dracul Morvinox is Vampire King, not some love-struck boy. He has responsibilities that transcend human understanding. Anger flared hot in Nora's chest, burning away the fear. Don't you think that's his decision to make? His judgment is compromised, the woman said coldly. We are trying to save both of you from the consequences of this attachment. By threatening me in my workplace? Great plan. Before any of them could respond, the temperature in the diner dropped precipitously. Frost formed on the windows, the lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness broken only by the streetlights outside. And then Sovereign was there, appearing between Nora and the three vampires with a speed that made their earlier movements look sluggish. His eyes blazed with fury, his entire presence radiating power that made the air itself seem to thicken and crackle. You dare, he said, his voice dropping to a register that resonated with supernatural command, to threaten what is mine. The three vampires immediately fell to their knees, their heads bowed in submission. My king, we were only trying to... Silence. Sovereign's word cut through the woman's explanation like a blade. You enter this place. You frighten her. You presume to make decisions about my life and my heart. Give me one reason why I should not end your immortal existence here and now. Because they're right, Nora said quietly. Sovereign spun to face her, his expression shifting from fury to confusion. What? She stepped around him, looking at the three vampires who still knelt on the diner floor. You can go. Tell whoever sent you that I'm not scared away that easily. The woman raised her head, meeting Nora's eyes with something like respect. The others who come will not be so merciful. They will not warn you first. Then I guess I'll have to be ready. Nora's voice was steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. Now get out of my diner. The three vampires rose, bowed once more to Sovereign, and vanished into the night with inhuman speed. The moment they were gone, Sovereign turned to Nora, his hands gripping her shoulders with barely restrained intensity. Are you hurt? Did they touch you? I'm fine. They were actually trying to help in their own terrifying way. She covered his hands with hers. But we need to talk about this. There is nothing to discuss. I will station guards around the diner, around your home. I will ensure no vampire comes within. Sovereign. She said his name firmly, cutting through his spiraling panic. Stop. Breathe. Well, not breathe, but you know what I mean. He stopped, his crimson eyes searching her face desperately. Is it true? Nora asked. Are there vampires who will try to use me to get to you? Yes, his jaw clenched. My position makes me powerful, but also vulnerable to political machinations. There are those who have long desired my throne, who would see any perceived weakness as an opportunity. And you, Nora, you've become both my greatest strength and my most significant vulnerability. Okay. She processed this, her mind working through implications and possibilities. So we have a few options. 1, I walk away, we end this before it goes any further. 2, we continue, but I become a prisoner, trapped in whatever fortress you call home, protected but not free. Or 3, we figure out how to navigate this together as partners. I will not let you walk away, Sovereign said immediately, fiercely. Not unless that is truly what you want, and perhaps not even then. I have existed for 3 centuries, Nora. I have conquered lands, amassed power, built an empire of darkness, and none of it has made me feel the way you do. You have reminded me what it means to care for something beyond duty and blood. Then, option 3, she said, rising on her toes to kiss him softly. We figure it out together. But Sovereign, you need to understand I won't be a damsel locked in a tower. If I'm going to be part of your world, I need to really be part of it. That means meeting your court, understanding vampire politics, learning how to defend myself." He wanted to argue, she could see it in his eyes. Every instinct he possessed screamed at him to hide her away, to protect her from all possible harm. But he also saw the steel in her gaze, the determination that had first drawn him to her. "Very well," he said finally. "I will introduce you to my world. But Nora, you must promise me if I tell you something is too dangerous, you will listen. Your mortality means you cannot heal from injuries the way my kind can. You cannot afford to be reckless." "Says the vampire who's starting a political crisis by dating a diner waitress," she pointed out. "The situations are hardly comparable." "Sure they're not." She took his hand, marveling at how natural it felt despite everything. "So when do I get to see this eternal court of yours?" "Tomorrow night," Sovereign decided. "I will present you formally, make it clear that you are under my protection. It will not stop everyone, but it will establish consequences for those who think to harm you." That sounds ominous and romantic in equal measure, which I guess is just our relationship in a nutshell. Nora glanced around the diner, at the frost still coating the windows. "I should probably clean this up before Jerry comes in tomorrow and has a heart attack. Allow me." Sovereign raised one hand, and warmth flooded back into the diner, the frost evaporating as though it had never been. "I may not be able to eat your meatloaf, but I have my uses." "Show off," but she was smiling, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. They spent the rest of the night together at the diner, talking through logistics and possibilities. Sovereign explained the structure of vampire society, the ancient houses, the territorial disputes, the rigid hierarchies that had existed for millennia. He told her about his own rise to power, the challenges he had faced, the enemies he had made. He painted a picture of a world that existed parallel to human society, older and darker, and governed by rules that would seem alien to mortal minds. Nora listened, asked questions, and slowly began to understand the enormity of what she was stepping into. But with each revelation, each new piece of knowledge about the dangerous world Sovereign inhabited, her resolve only strengthened. She had spent years playing it safe, following the path of least resistance, letting life happen to her. Being with Sovereign meant embracing risk, but it also meant embracing the most vivid, intense, genuine connection she had ever experienced. When the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, Sovereign reluctantly prepared to leave. "I will send a car for you tomorrow evening," he said, holding both her hands in his. "It will bring you to the court. Dress however you wish, there are no formal requirements, and I want them to see you as you truly are." A sleep-deprived waitress in sneakers? A woman of courage and strength who has somehow chosen to care for a monster. He kissed her forehead gently. A woman who makes 3 centuries of darkness feel suddenly illuminated. "You're really leaning into the romantic vampire thing," Nora said, but her voice was thick with emotion. "I'll see you tomorrow night. Try not to start any wars in the meantime." "I make no promises." With one last lingering look, Sovereign vanished into the fading night, moving too quickly for human eyes to track. Nora stood alone in the diner, her heart pounding with anticipation and fear and exhilaration. Tomorrow night, she would enter a world of vampires. Tomorrow night, she would stand before an ancient court as the unlikely partner of their king. Tomorrow night, everything would change. She had never been more terrified or more certain that she was doing exactly what she was supposed to do. The car that arrived for Nora the following evening was predictably dramatic, a black limousine with tinted windows and a driver who had the telltale pale features of a vampire. She had dressed in simple black pants and a deep green blouse, comfortable but presentable, refusing to pretend to be something she wasn't. The drive took her out of the city proper and into the hills beyond, where old estates and forgotten mansions crouched among ancient trees. They pulled up to what appeared to be an abandoned church, Gothic and imposing, its spires reaching toward the darkening sky. "The court convenes beneath," the driver said, opening her door with formal precision. "His Majesty awaits you inside." Nora stepped out, looking up at the church with a mixture of awe and trepidation. Of course, vampires would hold court under a church. The irony was probably intentional. Sovereign met her at the entrance, and the sight of him stole her breath. He wore formal attire that somehow managed to be both modern and timeless, black as always, but cut with a precision that emphasized his inhuman grace. His white hair was pulled back partially, revealing the sharp lines of his face, and his eyes glowed softly in the gathering dusk. You came, he said, and she heard the relief in his voice. Did you think I wouldn't? I hoped, but I would not have blamed you for fleeing. He offered her his arm, and she took it, feeling the cool strength beneath the fabric. I must warn you, what you are about to see may be overwhelming. My court is ancient and often cruel. They will test you. Then I guess I'd better pass, Nora said with more confidence than she felt. He led her into the church, which was indeed abandoned in its upper levels, pews covered with dust, stained glass windows cracked and faded. But in the back, behind the altar, a stone staircase descended into darkness. As they walked down, torches lit themselves along the walls, flames that burned without smoke or heat. The stairs went deep, far deeper than should have been possible, and Nora realized they were descending into something vast and ancient, a space that had existed long before the church above was built. Finally, they emerged into a massive underground chamber. It was magnificent and terrible in equal measure, high vaulted ceilings supported by columns carved with imagery from a dozen different eras, floors of polished black stone, and everywhere, vampires. They stood in clusters or sat on elaborate furniture, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. All had the characteristic white hair and pale skin. All moved with that subtle wrongness that marked them as other. They wore clothing from different periods, some in modern dress, others in garments, centuries old, creating a visual collage of immortal existence. And all of them turned to stare as Sovereign entered with Nora on his arm. The silence was absolute and suffocating. Nora felt the weight of their gazes, felt them assessing her, judging her, finding her wanting. She lifted her chin and met their stares with as much confidence as she could muster. Sovereign led her to a raised dais at the far end of the chamber, where an ornate throne sat carved from some dark wood and inlaid with silver. He sat, pulling her gently to stand beside him, his hand never leaving hers. Members of the Eternal Court, he said, his voice resonating through the chamber with supernatural power. I present to you Nora Lindell. She is human, mortal, and fragile by our standards. She is also under my personal protection. Any who harm her answer to me. Murmurs rippled through the assembled vampires. Nora could hear fragments of conversation, words like madness and weakness and unprecedented. A male vampire stepped forward from the crowd, older than the others in bearing if not in appearance. He had long white hair braided elaborately and wore clothing that suggested medieval nobility. My king, you honor us by sharing your companion. But surely you must see how this appears. A human? Here? I see exactly how it appears, Valdrin. Sovereign's tone could have frozen fire. I see that I am king, and my choices are not subject to your approval. Of course not, Majesty. Valdrin bowed, but his eyes flickered with something dangerous. But there are traditions, protocols. For one of our kind to take a human lover is one thing, but to bring her before the court, to grant her protection, this grants her status. Power. It suggests she may one day be turned. That is her choice to make, not yours, Sovereign said coldly. Nora felt her heart stutter, turning, becoming a vampire. That possibility hadn't even occurred to her, too caught up in the immediate drama to think about long-term implications. The idea was both terrifying and intriguing, living forever, yes, but also giving up humanity, giving up sunlight, giving up so much of what made her herself. If I may speak, Nora said, her voice smaller than she would have liked in the vast chamber. Every vampire turned to stare at her with various expressions of shock. Apparently humans didn't typically address the Eternal Court. Sovereign squeezed her hand in support. You may. I don't want to be a vampire, she said clearly. I'm not here to gain power or status or immortality. I'm here because I care about him. She gestured to Sovereign. Because somehow, despite every logical reason not to, we found each other. I don't expect you to understand it. I barely understand it myself. But I'm not going anywhere, and I'm not apologizing for existing. The silence that followed her words was deafening. Then, unexpectedly, laughter rang out from somewhere in the crowd. A female vampire emerged, younger looking than Valdrin, with wild white curls and clothing that suggested 1920s fashion. Oh, I like her, the woman declared. She has spine. When was the last time anyone spoke to this court with such irreverence? She approached the dais, eyeing Nora with open curiosity. I am Isadora, and you, little mortal, are either very brave or very foolish. Can't it be both? Nora replied. Isadora's grin widened, showing fangs. Indeed it can. Sovereign, you have chosen. Interestingly. I have chosen with my heart, Sovereign said, his voice softening as he looked at Nora. Something I did not think possible after so many years of darkness. Pretty words, Valdrin interjected, but they do not address the practical concerns. This human is a vulnerability. Already there are factions plotting to use her against you. By bringing her here, you have confirmed their suspicions and given them a clear target. Then those factions will learn what it means to incur my wrath, Sovereign replied, his tone dropping to something deadly. I have been a merciful king. Perhaps too merciful. That mercy does not extend to those who threaten what is mine. You would go to war over a human? Valdrin's expression was incredulous. Risk the stability of everything we have built? Yes. No hesitation, no doubt. Sovereign stood, and the power radiating from him made every vampire in the chamber take an involuntary step back. I would burn this entire world to ash before I allowed harm to come to her. Make no mistake, Nora Lindell is not my weakness. She is my line in the sand. Test me on this, and you will not survive the lesson. Nora felt something fierce and warm bloom in her chest at his words. It should have been terrifying, the intensity of his devotion, the violence implied in his protection. But instead, she felt safe in a way she never had before. This ancient, dangerous creature had chosen her, and he would move heaven and hell to keep her safe. The king has spoken, Isadora said, breaking the tense silence. And frankly, it's about time something interesting happened around here. I vote we accept the human and see what happens. This is not a democracy, Valdrin snapped. No, it is a monarchy, Sovereign agreed. My monarchy. And I have made my decision. Nora is welcome in this court. She will be taught our ways, given the knowledge to navigate our world safely. And any vampire who harms her will face execution. Is this understood? Slowly, reluctantly, the assembled vampires bowed or nodded their acknowledgement. Not all looked pleased. Valdrin's expression remained stormy, but none dared openly defy their king. Excellent, Sovereign said, sitting back down and pulling Nora closer to him in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. Now, shall we discuss the matter of the Eastern Territories? I believe there were concerns about the Bloodborne Covenant encroaching on established boundaries. The court meeting proceeded, vampires stepping forward to present various disputes and concerns. Nora stood beside Sovereign's throne, watching and learning, beginning to understand the complex web of politics and power that governed this hidden world. He kept one hand on hers throughout, a constant point of connection, occasionally leaning over to whisper explanations of who someone was or what a particular issue meant. Hours passed. Vampires apparently had endless patience for bureaucratic proceedings, and Nora's feet began to ache. Sovereign noticed immediately, concern flickering across his features. We will adjourn, he announced suddenly, cutting off a vampire mid-sentence. I trust you can all manage your territories without burning them down for one evening. There were more boos, more ritual farewells, and then Sovereign was leading her away from the dais through a side corridor that branched off from the main chamber. I'm sorry, he said as soon as they were alone. I should have realized how tiring that would be for you. You need rest, food, things I sometimes forget are necessities. It's okay, Nora assured him, though she was indeed exhausted. It was illuminating. Your court is dramatic, pretentious, utterly convinced of their own importance. I was going to say complicated, but those work too. She leaned against the cool stone wall, looking up at him. That thing Valdrin said, about turning me. Is that something you've thought about? Sovereign's expression became guarded. It has crossed my mind. But Nora, you must understand, becoming vampire means death. Your human life ends. You gain immortality, power, but you lose the warmth of sunlight, the taste of food, the simple pleasures of mortality. You become something other. I would never ask that sacrifice of you. But what happens when I get older, and you don't? When I'm 40, 50, 60, and you're still exactly as you are now? The question had been haunting her since Valdrin brought up the possibility. Then I will cherish every year, every moment, Sovereign said fiercely. I will love you through every stage of your life, and when your mortal days end, I will mourn you for the rest of my endless existence, but I will not steal your humanity simply to keep you with me forever. Tears pricked at Nora's eyes, overwhelmed by the depth of what he was offering. That's the saddest, most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. I have had 3 centuries to perfect my tragic declarations, but his attempt at levity was undercut by the raw emotion in his eyes. She pulled him down into a kiss, pouring everything she couldn't articulate into the connection. He responded with careful intensity, always mindful of his strength, his inhuman nature, the danger he represented even in moments of tenderness. When they broke apart, Sovereign rested his forehead against hers. "I should take you home. You need sleep." "I need you," she corrected softly. "Everything else can wait." Something in his expression shifted, became heated. "Nora, show me the rest of your world," she said. "Not the court, not the politics. Show me where you live. Let me into your life completely." He searched her face, looking for doubt or fear, and finding none. "Very well. Come." Sovereign led her deeper into the underground complex, past the grand chamber where the court convened, through tunnels carved from living rock and hallways lined with artwork from a dozen different centuries. Finally, they reached an ornate door guarded by 2 vampires who bowed deeply at Sovereign's approach. "Leave us," he commanded. "No one is to disturb us for any reason short of war." The guards disappeared, and Sovereign opened the door to reveal his personal chambers. Nora stepped inside and caught her breath. It was magnificent, a massive suite of rooms that somehow managed to feel both palatial and intimate. The main chamber featured soaring ceilings, bookcases that stretched from floor to ceiling filled with volumes in dozens of languages, comfortable furniture that mixed eras with careless elegance, and artwork that belonged in museums. Tapestries depicting medieval battles hung beside modern paintings, creating a visual timeline of immortal existence. "This is where you live?" Nora walked slowly through the space, taking it in. "One of the places." Sovereign watched her explore, his expression unreadable. "I have residences scattered across the world, but this is the closest thing I have to a home, the heart of my power, the seat of my throne." She paused before a painting that looked familiar. "Is this an original Caravaggio?" "Yes, I knew him briefly before his death. Temperamental man, but brilliantly talented." "Of course you knew Caravaggio," Nora muttered, shaking her head. "Is there anyone famous you haven't met?" "I missed the Beatles, much to my regret." He moved behind her, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. "Does this frighten you? The age of me? The things I've seen and done?" "It should," Nora admitted, turning to face him. "But mostly it just makes me want to know everything. Every story, every experience. You contain centuries, Sovereign. How could that be anything but fascinating?" He cupped her face in his hands, his touch reverent. "You are remarkable. Do you understand that? You stand in the lair of a monster, surrounded by proof of my inhuman nature, and you look at me with wonder instead of terror." "You're not a monster," Nora said firmly. "You're complicated, dangerous, yes, but not monstrous. Monsters don't protect. Monsters don't care. Monsters don't spend weeks coming to a diner just to talk to a waitress who makes them feel human again." "Perhaps I am not a monster now," Sovereign allowed, "but I have been. I have done terrible things, Nora. I have killed, conquered, destroyed. The blood on my hands could fill oceans." "Then tell me," she challenged. "Tell me the worst thing you've ever done. Let me decide if it changes how I feel." He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant with memory. When he spoke, his voice was hollow. "In 1847, there was a rival vampire lord who challenged my authority. His name was Christoph the Red, and he was powerful, ambitious, and cruel. We fought, as was our way, and I defeated him. But that was not enough for me. I wanted to send a message to any others who might think to challenge my rule." Sovereign paused, and Nora could see the weight of ancient guilt in his expression. "So I did not simply kill him. I destroyed his entire bloodline, every vampire he had sired, every descendant of those vampires. Dozens of them, some barely transformed, some who had never even met Christoph. I hunted them all down and ended them because their very existence threatened my power. Women, young vampires barely past their turning, none of it mattered. I was thorough, efficient, and absolutely merciless." The silence that followed was heavy. Nora processed his words, the confession of mass murder delivered in his steady, accented voice. "Do you regret it?" she asked finally. "Yes and no." Sovereign met her eyes. "I regret the cruelty, the unnecessary deaths of those who were innocent, but I do not regret the message it sent, the decades of peace that followed because no one dared challenge me. My ruthlessness saved countless lives by preventing wars that would have been far more devastating." The trolley problem with fangs, Nora murmured. I do not understand that reference. It's a thought experiment. Do you kill one person to save 5? There's no right answer. She took his hands, holding them firmly. I'm not going to stand here and say what you did was okay, because it wasn't. But I also understand that your world operates under different rules than mine. And I see the guilt you carry, which tells me you're not the same person who made that choice almost 200 years ago. You should be running from me, Sovereign said, but he held her hands like she was the only thing anchoring him to sanity. Probably, Nora agreed. But I told you before I'm terrible at doing what I should. Besides, I think I'm in love with you, which makes running away pretty difficult. The words hung in the air between them, enormous and terrifying and true. Sovereign's eyes widened, genuine shock crossing his features. You love me. Yeah, Nora felt heat creeping up her neck but didn't look away. Is that okay? I know we've only known each other a few weeks, and the whole different species thing probably complicates matters, but he kissed her, cutting off her rambling with an intensity that stole her breath. When he pulled back, his eyes blazed with emotion that had no name. I have existed for 347 years, Sovereign said against her lips. I have felt many things: rage, ambition, satisfaction, boredom. But love? I thought that died with my humanity. You have proven me spectacularly wrong, Nora Lindell. I love you with a ferocity that terrifies me. Good terrifying or bad terrifying? I have not yet decided. But he was smiling, that rare expression transforming his austere features into something breathtaking. Stay with me tonight. Not forever, not as some permanent prisoner, just tonight. Let me hold you and pretend for a few hours that we are simply two people who found each other instead of a disaster waiting to happen. You have the absolute worst romantic declarations, Nora said, but she was already letting him lead her toward what she assumed was his bedroom. But yes, I'll stay. They lay together in his massive bed, Nora curled against Sovereign's chest despite the coolness of his skin. He stroked her hair with infinite gentleness, both of them simply existing in the quiet intimacy of the moment. What happens now? Nora asked softly. I can't exactly move down here permanently, and you can't exactly move into my tiny apartment. We will find a compromise, Sovereign said. Perhaps a house for you, somewhere between your world and mine, someplace with security I can control but freedom you require, and we will take each night as it comes, building something that belongs to only us. That sounds nice. She yawned, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Will you be here when I wake up? I will be here. A promise, absolute and unbreakable. I will always be here, for as long as you want me. Forever then, Nora murmured, already drifting toward sleep. Better clear your schedule. Sovereign held her as she slept, marveling at the trust implicit in her vulnerability. This fragile mortal woman had walked into his world without fear, had looked at the darkest parts of him and chosen to love him anyway. She was either the bravest person he had ever met or completely insane. Probably both. He knew the dangers ahead were real. Valdrin's concerns, while politically motivated, were not wrong. There were vampires who would see Nora as a tool to use against him, who would try to harm her to weaken his rule. He would need to be vigilant, protective, perhaps even more ruthless than he had been in decades. But looking down at her peaceful face, feeling something in his chest that he had assumed dead centuries ago, Sovereign knew with absolute certainty that she was worth it. Worth the risk, worth the complications, worth potentially upending the entire vampire world. He had spent 300 years building power, enforcing order, maintaining control. Perhaps it was time to risk it all for something more precious than any throne. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm. Nora continued working at the diner. She refused to let Sovereign simply take care of her financially, but with increased security. Vampires loyal to the king watched from the shadows, ensuring no threats approached. Sovereign visited every night, sometimes staying just for an hour, sometimes remaining until dawn forced him back underground. He bought her a house as promised, a beautiful Victorian-style home on the outskirts of the city that straddled the line between the human and supernatural neighborhoods. It had modern amenities but Gothic charm, with enough space for both of them and security measures that would make Fort Knox jealous. Nora began to learn more about vampire culture, studying under Isadora, who had appointed herself as Nora's tutor in supernatural matters. The older vampire taught her about the different bloodlines, the complex hierarchies, the ancient feuds that still simmered beneath civilized veneers. She learned which vampires could be trusted and which were actively plotting against Sovereign's rule. "You're picking this up quickly," Isadora commented one evening as they sat in Nora's new house, books about vampire history spread across the dining table. "Most humans take months to understand even the basics of our politics." "Most humans aren't dating the vampire king," Nora replied dryly. "Steep learning curve." "Fair point." Isadora studied her with ancient eyes that had seen centuries pass. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." "Why haven't you asked him to turn you?" The question hung heavy in the air. Nora set down the book she had been reading, considering her answer carefully. "Because I'm not sure that's what I want. And even if it is, I need to be absolutely certain before I make that choice. Sovereign has made it clear he would never force me, never pressure me, so I have time to figure it out. You know you're mortal, right?" Isadora's tone was gentle but firm. "You have maybe 60 years left if you're lucky. That's nothing to us. A blink. He will watch you age and die, and it will destroy him." "I know," Nora met the vampire's gaze steadily. "But wouldn't it destroy him even more if I became vampire out of obligation instead of genuine desire? If I gave up my humanity just to make things easier and ended up resenting him for it?" Isadora was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You are wise for one so young. Very well, we will not speak of it further. Now, tell me what you know about the Bloodborne Covenant and why they are absolute bastards." Meanwhile, in the shadows of the vampire world, Valdrin was indeed plotting. He had not survived for 8 centuries by accepting defeat gracefully. If Sovereign Dracul Morvinox wanted to weaken himself with mortal attachments, then Valdrin would simply need to demonstrate how foolish that weakness was. He gathered his allies vampires who resented Sovereign's rule, who chafed under his laws, who wanted the freedom to hunt and kill as their natures demanded. Together, they formed a plan. They would not simply kill the human girl. That would be too quick, too clean, and it would make her a martyr. No, they would take her, hold her, use her as leverage to force concessions from Sovereign that would weaken his authority and create openings for challenge. It was a delicate plan, requiring precise timing and coordination. But Valdrin was patient. He had time. What he did not account for was Nora herself. The attack came on a quiet Tuesday night, 3 months into Nora and Sovereign's relationship. She was closing up the diner, humming along to the radio, when the power suddenly cut out. Nora froze, her hand moving immediately to the phone in her pocket where she had Sovereign on speed dial. But before she could call, figures emerged from the darkness, 5 vampires, moving with coordinated precision. "Scream and you die immediately," one of them said conversationally. "Come quietly, and you might live to see your lover again." Nora's mind raced. She had learned much in recent months, including the fact that vampire hearing was exceptional. If she could buy time, if she could make noise, Sovereign's guards would notice something was wrong. So instead of complying, she threw the coffee pot she was holding directly at the nearest vampire's face. It shattered spectacularly, and the vampire hissed in pain. Not real damage, they were far too durable for that, but surprising enough to buy her seconds. She ran, not toward the exit where they could easily cut her off, but toward the kitchen where there were more potential weapons. "Stupid mortal," one of the vampires snarled, and then they were after her with inhuman speed. She made it to the kitchen, grabbing a knife from the block by the stove. It wouldn't do much against vampires, but it was better than nothing. Behind her, she heard the vampires approaching, heard their laughter at her futile resistance. "This is entertaining," one said. "I can see why our king likes you. Such spirit." "He's going to tear you apart," Nora spat, brandishing the knife. "You know that, right? The second he finds out about this, you're all dead." "Perhaps," the vampire acknowledged, "but that assumes you survive long enough to tell him. Now, put down the knife and—" The diner's front window exploded inward. Sovereign appeared in the shower of glass, and Nora had never seen him like this. His eyes blazed with crimson fury, his fangs fully extended, power radiating from him in waves that made the air itself seem to ripple. He moved faster than her eyes could track, and suddenly one of the attacking vampires was in his grip, lifted off the ground like a toy. "You dare," Sovereign said, his voice dropping to something that resonated with ancient power and promised death, "to touch what is mine." He tore the vampire's head from their body with casual brutality, tossing the remains aside like garbage. The other 4 attackers scattered, trying to flee, but more vampires poured into the diner sovereign's guards, responding to the alarm, blocking every exit. It was over in minutes, brutal, efficient, and absolutely terrifying. When the last of the attackers had been subdued, Sovereign wanted at least one alive for questioning. He turned to Nora with an expression of such raw fear and relief that it broke her heart. "Are you hurt?" His hands were gentle as they roamed over her, checking for injuries, despite the violence they had just committed. "Did they touch you?" "I'm okay," Nora assured him, though she was shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "They were trying to take me, but I fought back, bought enough time for your guards to notice. You fought vampires, with a kitchen knife." Sovereign looked at the weapon still clutched in her hand, then at her face, and something that might have been pride flickered in his expression. "You are either the most courageous woman I have ever met, or the most foolish." "You know it's both," Nora said, echoing their conversation from months ago. Then, because the stress and fear needed an outlet, she started to laugh. "I threw a coffee pot at them. Jerry's going to be so mad about the window." Sovereign pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully despite his obvious desire to never let go. "I could have lost you tonight if you had not fought back, if my guards had been seconds slower." "But they weren't," Nora interrupted, wrapping her arms around him. "I'm fine. We're fine." "This was Valdrin," Sovereign said coldly, looking toward the remaining captured vampire. "I can smell his involvement. He orchestrated this." "Then we deal with him," Nora said firmly. "Together." The confrontation with Valdrin happened the next night, in the great chamber where the Eternal Court convened. Every vampire of significance had been summoned, creating a crowd that filled the vast underground space with tension and anticipation. Valdrin stood before the dais where Sovereign sat on his throne, Nora beside him in a chair that had been placed there specifically for her, a statement of her status, her importance. The captured vampire from the attack knelt nearby, bound with silver chains that burned their skin. "You ordered an attack on Nora Lindell," Sovereign said without preamble. "Do you deny this?" "I deny nothing," Valdrin replied, his chin lifted defiantly. "I acted in the best interests of this court, of our people. You have allowed a mortal to compromise your judgment, to weaken your rule. I sought to remove that distraction." "By kidnapping and likely killing an innocent woman." Sovereign's voice was dangerously quiet. "You speak of the court's best interests while violating the most fundamental law of my rule, that those under my protection are inviolate." "She is human." Valdrin's composure cracked, showing the frustration beneath. "She does not deserve such protection. She is food, livestock, not a person to be cherished and defended." "And that," Nora said, speaking for the first time, her voice ringing clear through the chamber, "is exactly why Sovereign is a better leader than you could ever be." The assembled vampires gasped at her audacity. Valdrin turned to glare at her with undisguised hatred. "You dare address me, mortal?" "I address a coward who sent others to do his dirty work," Nora continued, standing from her chair. Sovereign had tried to prepare her for this confrontation, had coached her on vampire politics and courtroom drama. But in the moment, she simply spoke from the heart. "You talk about strength and leadership, but you can't even face the truth that Sovereign's power doesn't come just from fear or violence. It comes from the fact that he understands something you never will, that caring about others doesn't make you weak, it makes you someone worth following." "Pretty speech," Valdrin sneered, "but meaningless coming from one who will be dust in decades while we continue on. You are temporary, insignificant." "She is mine," Sovereign interrupted, rising from his throne with lethal grace, "and I am king. Those two facts make her the most significant person in this entire court, because my will is absolute." He descended from the dais, and every vampire in the chamber took an involuntary step back from the power rolling off him. Even Valdrin, centuries old and formidable, looked suddenly uncertain. "You have betrayed me," Sovereign said softly. "You have broken our laws, endangered our court by creating internal conflict, and most unforgivably, you tried to harm the woman I love. For these crimes, there is only one punishment." "You would not dare," Valdrin hissed. "I have supporters, allies. Kill me and you risk civil war." "Then let there be war," Sovereign replied coldly, "because I will not allow this to stand. You wanted to prove that Nora was my weakness. Instead, you have proven that my strength is beyond your comprehension. I am willing to fight every vampire in this chamber if that is what it takes to protect her." He moved with inhuman speed, and suddenly Valdrin was on the ground, Sovereign's hand around his throat. But before you die, know this: she is not my weakness. She is my humanity, the thing that reminds me why I took this throne in the first place. Not for power, not for glory, but to build something better than endless violence and predation. You could never understand that, Valdrin. That is why you failed. Sovereign tore out Valdrin's throat, ending 8 centuries of existence in a spray of dark blood. The body dissolved to ash within seconds, leaving only silence in its wake. Sovereign stood, straightening his clothes calmly, and turned to face the court. Is there anyone else who wishes to challenge my judgment regarding Nora Lindell? Anyone else who thinks to use her against me? No one moved, no one spoke. The message was clear and absolute. Excellent. Sovereign returned to the dais, taking his seat once more. Nora sat beside him, her hand finding his and squeezing once, a gesture of support and solidarity. Then let us move forward. Isadora, I believe you had concerns about the Western Territories. The court meeting proceeded, business as usual, as though the king had not just executed one of the oldest vampires in existence. Nora remained at Sovereign's side throughout, listening and learning, occasionally offering observations that surprised the assembled vampires with their insight. When it was finally over and they returned to his chambers, the composure that Sovereign had maintained throughout the confrontation crumbled. I killed him, he said, sinking onto the sofa with his head in his hands. 800 years of existence ended because he threatened you. Do you regret it? Nora sat beside him, her hand resting on his back. No, Sovereign looked up at her, his crimson eyes tortured. That is what terrifies me. I do not regret it at all. I would do it again, would kill anyone who tried to harm you. What does that make me? Human, Nora said softly. In the ways that matter most, it makes you human. Caring about someone that much, being willing to defend them, that's not monstrous, Sovereign. That's love. I have turned you into a target, he continued, as if he hadn't heard her. By loving you, I have painted a mark on your back that will remain for as long as we are together. There will always be someone who thinks to use you against me. Then I'll learn to defend myself better, Nora said firmly. I'll train, study, do whatever it takes. But I'm not leaving you if that's what you're trying to get me to do. You're stuck with me. He pulled her into his arms, holding her with desperate tenderness. You should want to leave. You should be horrified by what you witnessed tonight. I was, Nora admitted. It was brutal and scary, and I'm probably going to have nightmares. But I also saw you defend me, protect me, fight for me. How am I supposed to be horrified by that? You are remarkable, Sovereign murmured into her hair, and I do not deserve you. Lucky for you, I don't care what you deserve. She pulled back to look at him. We're together, Sovereign. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Together, he repeated, as if testing the word. I've been alone for so long, I'd forgotten what that word could mean. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, simply holding each other, processing the violence and drama of the evening. Finally, Nora spoke again. I've been thinking about what Valdrin said, about being temporary. Sovereign stiffened. Nora, let me finish, she interrupted gently. He was right that I'm mortal, that I'll age and die while you stay the same. And I've been doing a lot of thinking about that reality over the past few months. If you are about to ask me to turn you out of obligation, I'm not, Nora assured him. That's not what this is. But Sovereign, I need you to understand I love you. Not for a few years, not until it gets complicated. I love you in a way that makes forever sound reasonable instead of terrifying. And yes, becoming a vampire means giving up a lot, but it also means getting to spend that forever with you. And I think, she paused, gathering her courage, I think that might be worth it. Sovereign went absolutely still. You're saying you want to be turned, truly. Not right now, Nora clarified. I'm still young, still human, and I want a bit more time with sunlight and bad coffee and all the stupid little mortal things, but someday? Yeah, someday I want that, if you're willing. If I am willing? Sovereign looked at her like she had offered him the world. Nora, I would give you immortality right now if you asked. I would share my endless existence with you and count every moment as a gift. But are you certain? There is no going back once the change is made. I'm certain, Nora said, and she was. The decision had been forming over weeks of watching Sovereign's world, of understanding what vampires were and what they could be. Not today, not this year, but eventually. when I'm ready to let go of my mortal life. That's what I want." He kissed her then, deep and passionate and filled with centuries of longing finally finding fulfillment. When they broke apart, both were trembling. "I will wait," Sovereign promised, "however long you need. A year, 10 years, 50. I will wait, and when you are ready, I will transform you with my own blood and bind you to me for all eternity." "That's the most romantic threat I've ever received," Nora said, laughing through tears she hadn't realized were falling. "God, we're so weird." "Profoundly weird," Sovereign agreed, "but together." "Always together," Nora confirmed. The months that followed were peaceful in ways that surprised everyone. With Valdrin gone and Sovereign's willingness to defend Nora proven beyond doubt, the challenges to their relationship decreased. Oh, there were still vampires who disapproved, still political complications and territorial disputes that required Sovereign's attention. But the court had accepted Nora's presence, and slowly, begrudgingly, some even began to respect her. She continued working at the diner, though Sovereign had bought the entire building and upgraded security significantly because she wanted to maintain that connection to her human life while she still had it. She studied with Isadora, learning vampire history and politics. She trained with Lucian, who had warmed to her after she proved her bravery during the attack, learning basic self-defense techniques adapted for humans fighting supernatural creatures. And every night, Sovereign came to her, whether at the diner, at her house, or in his chambers beneath the earth. They talked, laughed, loved, building a relationship that transcended the boundaries between mortal and immortal. 1 year after they met, Sovereign took Nora to the surface on the summer solstice, to a hilltop far from the city where they could watch the sunset together. "Next year," Nora said, leaning against him as the sky blazed with orange and pink. "I won't be able to see this anymore, not without pain." "We do not have to proceed with your transformation," Sovereign said, though she could hear the longing in his voice. "You could remain human, and I would love you just the same." "No," Nora said firmly. "I've had my year of sunlight and mortality. I'm ready. I want forever with you, Sovereign. All of it, the good, the bad, the eternal weirdness of being the vampire queen." "You would be my queen," he said wonderingly, as if the reality of it was just hitting him. Nora Lindell, ruler of the Eternal Court, sovereign over vampires who have existed for millennia. "Terrifying thought, isn't it?" She grinned up at him. "But I think I can handle it. I've got a pretty good teacher." As the sun sank below the horizon, Sovereign turned her to face him, his expression serious. "Are you absolutely certain? Once I begin the transformation, there's no stopping it. You will die as a human and be reborn as a vampire. Everything will change." "I'm certain," Nora said without hesitation. "I love you, Sovereign Dracul Morvinox. Let's be immortal weirdos together." He bit his own wrist, dark blood welling up, and offered it to her. "Then drink, my love. Let my blood remake you in darkness and eternity." Nora pressed her lips to his wrist and drank. The blood was strange cold, thick, tasting of copper, and something else, something that tingled on her tongue like electricity. As it flowed down her throat, she felt heat building in her chest, spreading through her body like wildfire. Sovereign held her as the transformation began, as her human heart beat faster and faster before finally stopping. As her body died and was remade into something new, as pain and euphoria washed over her in waves, rewriting her very existence at a cellular level. It lasted hours, or perhaps minutes. Time became meaningless in the throes of transformation. But finally, blessedly, it ended. Nora opened her eyes and the world was different. Colors were sharper, more vivid. She could hear Sovereign's clothes rustling against his skin, could hear nocturnal animals moving in the grass around them. She could smell everything, earth, night air, the lingering scent of her own mortal blood. And when she looked down at her hands, she saw them pale and perfect, unmarked by the scars and imperfections of human life. "How do you feel?" Sovereign asked, his voice tight with concern. Nora tested her new body, standing with a grace that felt foreign yet natural. She felt strong, powerful, alive in ways she never had as a human. But she also felt the absence, no heartbeat, no need to breathe, the instinctive knowledge that sunlight would now burn her to ash. "Different," she said. And her voice was changed too, smoother, carrying a subtle resonance. "But good, really good." She turned to Sovereign, seeing him with her new vampire senses. He was magnificent power and danger and beauty, all wrapped in one immortal package. and he was hers, for all eternity. "I love you," Nora said, pulling him into a kiss that was deeper and more passionate than anything she had experienced as a human, every sensation heightened by her transformation. "And I love you," Sovereign replied against her lips, "my Nora, my queen, my eternity." They stood together on the hilltop as night deepened around them, two immortals beginning an endless journey together. There would be challenges ahead, vampire politics, territorial disputes, the complications of ruling an ancient court. But they would face it all together, partners in both love and power. The Vampire King had found his queen in a diner waitress who treated him like a normal man. And in doing so, he had found not weakness as his enemies feared, but the greatest strength of all, someone worth living for, someone worth defending, someone worth spending forever beside. As they walked back toward the city, toward their court and their subjects, and their immortal responsibilities, Nora took Sovereign's hand and squeezed it once. He returned the gesture, a small smile playing at his lips. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. "None," Nora replied. "This is exactly where I want to be." And under the stars, two vampires made their way home together, ready to face whatever eternity had in store. The pale Sovereign and his fierce queen, bound by love that transcended mortality, united in a partnership that would reshape the vampire world for centuries to come. Their story was just beginning. Years passed, then decades. Nora proved to be everything Sovereign had hoped, and more a queen who balanced his ancient cruelty with modern compassion, who helped him navigate changing times, who reminded him why they ruled in the first place. She was beloved by some, feared by others, but respected by all. The Eternal Court flourished under their dual leadership. They reformed old laws, created new alliances, and slowly, carefully, began to build bridges between the vampire world and the mortal one. It was dangerous work, revolutionary work, but together they made it possible. And through it all, through centuries of challenges and changes, they remained what they had always been, two souls who found each other against impossible odds and chose love over fear, connection over isolation, forever over the easy path. The Vampire King had been stunned into silence the first time a diner waitress treated him like a normal man. He would spend eternity being grateful that she had. And Nora, who had once served coffee to strange customers in a late-night diner, now ruled an empire of darkness with the love of her immortal life by her side. She had given up sunlight and mortality, but she had gained something far more precious forever with the one person who made eternity feel like an adventure rather than a curse. Their love story, which began with mediocre coffee and ended with immortal devotion, would be whispered about in vampire circles for generations, the tale of how a mortal woman tamed the pale Sovereign, not through fear or power, but through simple human kindness and unwavering courage. And if sometimes, late at night when the court was quiet, they returned to that old diner now closed but preserved as a private retreat, and sat in their usual booth, reminiscing about the night they met, well, that was their secret. A reminder of where they came from, of the simple human connection that became the foundation of an immortal love. Forever was a long time. But together, they would make every moment of it count.